So my background is in human resources with a particular focus on human rights legislation and HR law.
This is Selena Paley. She's a single mom living in St. Albert, Alberta. She's also the co-founder of an independent media organization called Freedom Central.
This is not about Freedom Central, though. This is about like a larger subject, right? And I'm just one piece of that.
That's exactly right. This is not a podcast about Freedom Central, but it is a podcast about the ideas and debates that Freedom Central covers.
The definition of vaccine is it provides immunity, and this one does not. So I think that is incredibly misleading. We have had no shots at all whatsoever, and we're still fine and living and healthy and happy, and we have no adverse effects and reactions, and we are not dead. That's just a fact. That's the truth.
The problem is, it seems like Canadians have increasingly different ideas about what's true and what's not.
The latest reports coming out right now suggest that the adverse effects and reactions and deaths caused by the vaccines far outweigh the results of getting and living with COVID. That, I think, is more accurate.
For the record, it's not. There was a time when you could dismiss those kinds of views as fringe. But in the last couple of years, the fringe is encroaching on the mainstream.
For the last 7 days, we reached just over 3 million people. What that tells me is that everyone is relying on this type of information now as the truth.
I'm Taylor Owen.
And I'm Supriya Dwivedi. On this season of Screen Time, we're trying to figure out how we ended up in a world where facts are fluid and your reality is a reflection of your ideology.
From TVO Today, Antica Productions, and the Center for Media, Technology, and Democracy at McGill University, this is Screen Time, the battle for reality.
When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, it suddenly seemed like conspiracy theories were everywhere. I think a lot of people were taken aback by how prevalent they were and how many people believed them. But to be honest, I wasn't totally surprised. Maybe I should back up a little. In 2016, I got a job hosting a morning radio show in Toronto. And ever since, disinformation and conspiracy theories have become a part of my life. At the time, there were a lot of rumors floating around about certain news stories. Like in 2017, a Liberal MP introduced a motion condemning Islamophobia, and people started freaking out and saying that Sharia law was coming to Canada. When I would try to fact-check those rumors on the air, my inbox would be flooded with hate mail. I've always had a thick skin, and was always able to tolerate the threats when they were directed at me. But when my then 17-month-old daughter became the target of rape threats, I'd had enough. I quit my job as a radio host in late 2020. But those experiences have stayed with me. I never fully understood why correcting the record was so polarizing. Why has the truth become controversial?
I've been studying our information ecosystem for years now. And one answer to that question is that there are bad actors out there, intentionally spreading lies in an attempt to manipulate the public. We call that disinformation, and I worry that we may be more disinformed than ever. According to one recent poll, 1 in 4 Canadians now believe in online conspiracy theories. And those beliefs were on full display in the winter of 2022, when thousands of people from across the country descended on Ottawa for a massive protest. They called it the Freedom Convoy.
It was complete and utter chaos. There was, at any given moment, a feeling like they could have broken out into song or they could have broken into Parliament.
Justin Ling is a freelance investigative journalist who reported on the convoy.
I was staying in the same hotels as some of the occupiers and organizers, and it was everything you've heard. It was a mix of, a celebratory party atmosphere full of drunk folks who felt like they were on vacation. It was people harassing folks on the street. It was people waving around signs with a noose and a declaration that Justin Trudeau had to be tried and executed for treason. So everybody who tells you that it was a peace and love hippie fest is telling you part of the truth, and everybody who insists that it was a rebellious group of murderous insurrectionists is telling you half the truth as well. There were people in there who were doing so, I think, for the right reasons, maybe with the bad information. There were people in there who were white supremacists and extremists. It was a lot of different stuff happening at the same time.
The Freedom Convoy was ostensibly about vaccine mandates, but Justin says that if you listen to the people who were there, you'd start to hear a very different list of grievances.
Justin Trudeau needs to be tried for treason. The COVID-19 vaccines are experimental and dangerous. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, really runs the country, and the World Economic Forum pulls the strings. The trends of disinformation were pretty apparent everywhere you looked. You could look at some of the groups that actually signed on to the Freedom Convoy from the very beginning. Groups like Action for Canada, which on their website, they say the Prime Minister has committed treason. They say that Trudeau worked with Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum to add 5G microchips into the vaccines. They blame this global elite for the pandemic, which they say was cooked up in a lab.
But not everyone who was there was a conspiracy theorist.
Some of them had faced real hardships during the pandemic, as I think everyone has, right? Some of them lost their jobs. Some of them lost family members to COVID. Some of them lost family members and friends to suicide during the lockdowns, and they were absolutely inspired to do something about it. And it came from a place of saying to themselves, when injustice happens, civil disobedience is okay, and therefore I'm comfortable coming out and making a lot of people's lives sort of uncomfortable and difficult in order to achieve a really valid political end. Some people may have fallen for some disinformation. Some people may be blaming the wrong people. But at the end of the day, they were out there for relatively altruistic reasons.
There was no racism. There was no white supremacy, as the news likes to say. I didn't see any of that. Nobody cared what you looked like. You were just out there to hug each other after 2 years of lockdowns, because being locked down like that, you start to feel a little bit like a caged animal.
Selena Paley joined the convoy in Alberta, and her media organization, Freedom Central, was there to document the whole thing.
I think it was in Manitoba, I decided to get out and just start talking to people. Why are you out here in -35 with your Canadian flag? Like, what brings you out here today? And everyone's answer was the same. It's the same answer all across Canada, the exact same answer. For freedom. Freedom, baby, freedom. That's what they say.
But even if many of the protesters were well-intentioned, the motivations of the people organizing the convoy were a little murkier. Partly because this wasn't the first time they had tried something like this.
Obviously, there's a ton of people in this country who don't like the Prime Minister, but this particular strain of anti-Trudeau organizing largely steeps itself in conspiracy theories, right? So, the 2019 United We Roll protest rested on the idea that global warming is either a myth or wildly exaggerated, and that Trudeau is following some kind of Marxist plot to destroy the oil industry in order to rush us into communism.
The United We Roll protest was a clear predecessor to the Freedom Convoy, a group of trucks driving across the country to protest what they saw as an overbearing federal government. There was also a protest organized by a guy named Norman Traversy. On Canada Day of 2020, he and some other protesters occupied a park in Ottawa and said they wouldn't leave until Justin Trudeau was arrested for child trafficking.
Eventually they gave up. But it was some of those people from the United We Roll, some of the people from that July 1st protest, some other people who have been engaged in some wild conspiracy theories about the vaccine and the pandemic and the Prime Minister, the World Economic Forum, and everything in between, have been percolating like, what could we do that would actually make an impact?
In other words, it wasn't just that there were conspiracy theories floating around the Freedom Convoy. They were a part of its DNA.
This, for many of those organizers, was their chance at the big times, right? These people were out to some degree to advance their particularly paranoid worldview, in some cases to launch a movement that would pull in, and did pull in, tens of millions of dollars and thrust them into the big time, and in some cases to take down a prime minister.
So the ways that conspiracy theories take hold societally and then personally for individual people are complicated. There are social, economic, historical, and psychological factors. There are a bunch of different things. The most successful conspiracy theories tend to be ones that have a real-world urgency and explain a real-world event, hence the prevalence of COVID conspiracy theories. My name is Anna Merlan, and I am a senior reporter at Motherboard, Vice News' tech division. I'm also the author of Republic of Lies, American Conspiracy Theorists and Their Surprising Rise to Power.
Anna Merlan isn't surprised that the convoy was a hotbed of conspiratorial thinking.
We know that people who are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories tend to be people with a high degree of pessimism about their place in society. They don't necessarily believe that institutions of power are looking out for them. They don't necessarily believe that their own lives are getting better. And they tend to see the deck as being stacked against them, often quite reasonably in the case of, for instance, minority communities. And so we have all these different things that create kind of this perfect petri dish for conspiracy theories societally and then conspiracy thinking on like an individual level.
Sometimes when you've been through a lot of really bad things, you've lost family members, you've lost friends, you've lost your job, you've lost your income, you lost your house, right? You've lost a lot in your life because of the stupid pandemic.
Journalist Justin Ling again.
Sometimes it's really comforting to live in a world where there is white and dark, where there is good and evil, where there is a crusade against tyranny, and you know eventually you're going to win. The reality is a lot messier.
A lot of the conspiracy theories about COVID are far-fetched. That it was a plandemic, that Bill Gates put a microchip in the vaccine. But Anna Merlan says the distrust that underpins these theories is actually pretty understandable.
So a conspiracy theory is the belief that a powerful group of people are working in secret against the common good to effect a negative change in society, to hide a consequential secret, to seize power, something like that. A conspiracy, of course, is when that is actually occurring. And it's important to make that distinction because American history is rife with examples of actual conspiracies that have affected public life, public policy, public discourse. So medical conspiracy theories are incredibly common because medical neglect and abuse and malpractice against especially minority communities is so common in the US. You know, the most infamous example we have is the Tuskegee experiments, where the federal government allowed a group of Black men to remain infected with syphilis for like 30 years, long after we knew how to treat that illness, to track the progression of the disease. There is the Mississippi appendectomy, which is when mostly Black, Latina, and Native women were sterilized against their will and without their knowledge. The US has a long history of human radiation experiments where the government and private corporations were dosing prison inmates, children in state care, other vulnerable people with radiation to do various experiments about how radiation spread through the body.
Canada's not immune to these kinds of abuses either. Indigenous women in this country have reported being forcibly sterilized as recently as 2018.
And so we try really hard not to dismiss the idea out of hand that there is no such thing as an actual conspiracy.
Big Pharma has been involved in conspiracies as well. The most infamous example might be Purdue, the American pharmaceutical company that contributed to and profited from an opioid crisis that has killed hundreds of thousands of people.
We have an incredibly long history of medical abuse that has led to very low trust in the kind of medical establishment. And so, of course, that came to a head with COVID and COVID conspiracy theories. So my experience is that on an individual level, something has to happen for you to engage in conspiratorial thinking. A system has to have failed you. And so, often when I speak to people, it is the medical establishment failing them in some way, leading to anti-vaccine beliefs. And I think the issue with marking things baselessly as disinformation is that it robs people of their agency, and it fails to truly understand why people are engaging in and following conspiracy theories. It almost creates like a brainwashing model and claims that people are being set in front of their computers and hypnotized, which is just simply not what is happening.
So let's take the convoy in its first weekend, right? We kind of forget, February 2022, some of us haven't seen our family in years. People are tired, people are exhausted.
Stephanie Carvin is an associate professor of international affairs at Carleton University and a former national security analyst.
I think there was a lot of people who had lost hope and weren't being given any plan, any hope by the government. And when people don't have hope and when there's no plan, of course people are going to jump onto the easy ideas, the easy solutions, the convenient narratives, because that's what's on offer.
Stephanie says that while the scale of the convoy was unprecedented, the ideas that swirled around it weren't.
If you look at the narratives that have been pushed since the 1930s in Canada, a lot of them are very similar to what you see now. Ideas about shady world orders, the idea of government control, communist control, and all these kinds of things.
Anna Merlan, the vice journalist, says that some of those narratives go back even further than that.
Conspiracy theories have always been a valuable way to rally your base against a common enemy, to tell them, who they should be mad at, to blame for something that you perhaps did not get done, or, a promise that you didn't keep, and to kind of point the finger at a useful group of outsiders. And we've been seeing that since the Middle Ages. There's nothing new about that specifically. Before it was Davos, it was the United Nations. Before it was the United Nations, it was, the Jews. So the idea that conspiracy theories are somehow more or worse, or that we've entered some kind of golden age for them, I think is a little bit ahistorical. But of course, what has changed is the delivery mechanism, meaning the internet and social media, and the speed of it.
It's really the speed at which these things can flow, right? And when bad information gets out there, and if it's something that people really like, it goes very, very quickly and spreads very fast. People, I think, are clicking on things that they agree with, and they're not really caring, almost as if it's true or not.
Former national security analyst Stephanie Carvin again.
From a national security perspective, the thing I worry about when you talk about disinformation in these spaces is that the most extreme view tends to become the dominant one in a group of people over time. If there's a group of people who are opposed to Trudeau, and there's no shortage of that. And by the way, you can be opposed to Trudeau. This is something you very much can be. But, over time, the most extreme person in that group, their views will become dominant, and the other people tend to shift towards that more extreme view. People call it an echo chamber. It's not just an echo chamber. It's like there's actual movement in these circles that push people towards more and more radical views over time. And that, I think, is the thing, that when disinformation is constantly circulating in that kind of polarized environment, then it becomes a serious problem, and you then get the risk of potentially radicalization of violence.
But Stephanie also says that having radical views doesn't automatically make you a threat to national security.
You can walk around and think that everything in Canada is bad and, there's a deep state that's controlled. There's nothing wrong with that. The point is that you have a lot of nonviolent radicals, and I don't want to say that's okay. It's not okay for a variety of reasons, but it's not a national security issue. You don't want an organization like CSIS saying what people should and should not believe. What you worry about is the action. So has that polarized environment created a more permissive or an encouraging place for people who think that they want to change the system through violence?
It's not hard to see how these radical online spaces can lead to real-world violence. That's what happened with Pizzagate, the mosque shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C. And there were signs of it during the Freedom Convoy, too. when 4 men in Coutts, Alberta were arrested with a small arsenal of weapons and charged with conspiring to murder RCMP officers. One of the men was wearing the patch of a group called Diagolon, which the Canadian Anti-Hate Network describes as a neo-fascist militia. Their trial has yet to take place. All 4 men are still in custody, but none of them have been convicted.
If you're at the point where you're putting patches on you and you're taking up arms, then, you see this differently. So I think that helps change the conversation around what the national security threat was. But I mean, at the same time, it's like there's this other aspect of it, which is this idea of anti-democratic ideas that are out there. So anti-government movements, far-right ideas where people aren't necessarily acting violently. Like, that's actually the harder thing. It's almost easier when people are violent. Not when there's attacks and not when people die. Absolutely not. But like, if someone's plotting something, there's a lot our laws allow the state to do in order to stop that. But if someone's promoting the idea that, one day all these people are going to face justice, and one day someone's going to be brave enough to stand up to the government, and people are going to follow that person, and that person's going to be a hero. Like, what do you do about that? I mean, that's not a CSIS problem. That is a democratic values problem. And to be honest, I don't think we really know what to do about that.
Are conspiracy theories creating civil unrest, or is it the other way around? In all likelihood, it goes both ways. When people feel like they're on the margins of society, they're more likely to turn to conspiracy theories for comfort and for explanations. And when you start believing that a secret organization is planning to take over the world, you're probably not going to have much faith in democratic government. A lot of conspiracy theories strain credulity, but there's often a kernel of truth to them too. We do live in a world where power is concentrated among a small number of elites, a world where inequality is getting worse and people feel left behind. 1/5 of Canadians hold more than 2/3 of the country's wealth. Young people have largely been locked out of the housing market. And 1 in 5 Canadians say it's likely they'll have to use a food bank over the next 6 months. The problem is, people are taking these legitimate grievances and channeling them towards conspiratorial boogeymen like Bill Gates, George Soros, and Anthony Fauci. Some of those are just modern versions of scapegoats that have existed for hundreds of years. But some of these ideas are new, and if you pull back the curtain on them, you'll usually find that someone has something to gain from spreading them.
It's not this noble, righteous cause as they present themselves to the public. That's not the case at all. This is about money, this is about ego, this is about branding.
Is this economically motivated or is this ideologically motivated? Well, I don't know, but what I can tell you is it's curious how much money they're making.
That's next time on Screen Time, the battle for reality. The Battle for Reality is written and produced by Mitchell Stewart. It's hosted by Supriya Dwivedi and me, Taylor Owen. Our associate producer is Emily Morantz. Mixing and sound design by Mitchell Stewart. Our associate audio editor is Cameron McIver. Our executive producers are Stuart Cox and Laura Reguer. Laurie Few is the executive producer of digital at TVO. Shahryar Tadvidi is the managing editor of podcasts and digital video at TVO. If you want to know where we got our information from, we've included an annotated transcript in the show notes.